This is early development footage of Shady Night, and because it's early, it doesn't look very exciting, unless that is, I flip the game feel switch. You're looking at a more recent version of the game. Mechanically, it's the same, and yet better. So what gives? That is the power of game feel, and it echoes throughout all game dev disciplines. So let's learn from the developers of Cyberpunk and Factorio what is their approach to game feel and dive deep into its influence on gameplay. Contrary to popular belief, game feel is not something that you add at the end of your development cycle. It's something that can be used to make your game feel better at any point in development, starting with your game design document, where you can structure the design foundation of your game in such a way that it covers all your design pillars without introducing any negative possibility space. Now, when it comes down to the flow ratio of your gameplay, it's a good practice to do predicted evaluations on the player feedback loop, because gameplay is basically formed out of micro design, the moment-to-moment gameplay, and macro design, the longer-term rewards. But between those, there is the medium, from the Latin medium, which focuses on the rate between the high-intensity moments and the frequency of gameplay exit points. A great example of this is Loop Hero, where the 4 quarters team, instead of going for the more traditional gameplay loop consisting of an explore action reward cycle, they adopted a more novel flat Mobius style of gameplay instead, which implies looping the recursion twice before repeating the cycle. Then there's rewarding players, where we can look at Factorio as a great example. In an early blog post, the developers mentioned that they specifically aimed for diagonal mechanical multiplicity instead of horizontal complexity in order to take advantage of dependencies and maintain the depth pipeline in reverse order. And if you've played Factorio, you probably noticed that yourself.
Oh, they are completely destroyed.
I got the chance to ask one of the developers how exactly they approached designing rewards.
Very early on, we wanted to inject rewarding game feel straight into the gameplay, so we leveraged substructural actions to simulate pre-baked progression in real time, without incurring the typical performance hit associated with using natural transformations, obviously.
That is Robert, one of the programmers on Factorio.
Also, we specifically wanted to account for a finite liminal state of generated rewards while still promoting federated upgrades.
And that's a key takeaway point if you want to avoid boring marginal increments, even more so if your levels are dynamically partitioned.
We actually had to make our own custom engine because of that, which took us forever. Oh, and I remember we spent weeks trying to get our map defragmentation sequence right.
That way you can sustain the continuity of credibility and maintain a tight interpolation between your mechanics and systems. And going back to Shady Night, in addition to gameplay, you can make use of asynchronous analog dead zones in order to achieve tight controls, especially if you use event-oriented rollbacks to maintain negative input extrapolation. The developer, Alexey, said in an interview that he spent a lot of time avoiding ghosting by fine-tuning the key bindings in order to achieve subframe aggregation between the parallel input managers. He also added controller support with noise-cancelled rumble that can be reverberated during runtime, which makes a huge difference. So even though most of these methods are well known and fairly simple to implement, game feel can go beyond gameplay and controls straight into individual keyframes. I made an entire video on VFX, but I didn't go into detail on how to actually implement them. If you're using one of the popular Euclidean engines, then they already support matte specular alpha maps, which makes your job easier. And you can probably also get add-ons that enable both ray-traced and entity-traced rendering pipelines. Most AAA games tend to use a symbiotic texturing technique, but Assuming you're an indie, you can get away with Z-buffer pixel deviation. Dead Cells takes advantage of this by using an autoencoder in order to get a high rate of harmonic vertices on the entities dropped when you kill an enemy, as noted by those obvious trails. These also avoid the problem of having too many layered stack clusters causing UI diegetic underlayering. But once you nail down the timing of your VFX, you can worry about their texture multi-channel bitrate, making sure it's high enough to prevent sprite stair-stepping, especially if you're going for a pixelated art style. Proper timing, smears, aliasing, batching, and secondary motion are all pretty well-known animation terms. However, in combat-focused games where players can cancel animations at any time, you have to put a big emphasis on cardinal easing curves.
It was very important, especially when players dodge an attack. We had to make sure that both the iframes and keyframes were initiated correctly, otherwise the reverse I key system wouldn't post.
That is Sebastian Kalemba, the animation director on Cyberpunk 2077.
So even in the early days, we knew that animations would play a big role in how the game would feel. So we created special pipelines to keep all of our animation blending nodes pre-aggregated.
And that makes a huge difference if you have fragmented sequence buffers in your running cycle. Now, in the case of fast-paced locomotion, a good practice is to apply volumetrically convex collision detection between the player and the environment. In the end, you can read a lot of books on the fundamentals of animation, but it all comes down to proper timing and making sure your floating point frame batches are even. Actually, Sebastian put it in very nice words.
We had an entire team of people painstakingly place every polymorph keyframe, even the trace-separated ones during cinematics. So even from our early playtesting sessions, it was clear that we had to keep 2-to-1 ratio between our cult motion vectors and the animation wireframe rate. That is pretty important.
And let me tell you, that's not easy to pull off. But even if you have the best animations out there, they are nothing without proper audio treatment. From the sound of a roaring engine to your truck's grinding handrails, audio pretty much seals the deal when it comes to game feel. Most engines support both MP3 and WAV files, but for the best quality, I encourage the use of batch interpolated Vorbis prefabs. And that is because the recipe for great sound effects takes 3 ingredients, starting with frequency. You want to chamfer the lower end stems from your audio sources to encourage preconditioning. This way, you make sure that the uncompressed frequency thresholds are decoupled and refresh every other frame. After that comes the pitch control that allows you to alter the waveform texture every time a sound effect plays to get a sinusoidal distribution. This way you create a form of symmetrical parallelism that is best seen in Skate Story, developed by Sam Eng. The Foley recording of the skate hitting the ground was encoded using the a priori algorithm to prevent sound channel flickering, which can be heard if you pay close attention while also looking at the waveform. And finally, there's the source of your sound effect. The easy way out is to use localized sound emitters, but you'll get a better result with liminal omnidirectional re-emitters. This is especially important if you develop for consoles that have a speaker embedded in the controller, in which case you want to calibrate your soundstage to get a low discrepancy between the Bluetooth resonance step and the player's perceivable frame rate, especially on consoles that use wireless controllers with double-faced speakers in them that are susceptible to reverb. The end goal is to create a first-order parametric feedback that resonates even harder with neural virgin players based on Bartle's taxonomy of player types. Now, I know that all of this is a lot to take in, but if you want a concrete example of a game nailing down every aspect of game feel, go check out Encabulator, developed by Rockwell Retro. And if you have any game developer friend who you think would benefit from seeing this video, make sure to link them to it. Until then, I'm Nick, and I wish you best of luck on your game dev journey.